Hello, everyone. Glad y'all can join us tonight. Glad to have y'all here tonight. We're going to be talking about a lot about the cell phone data and reason I was doing some research into it and about victimologies and seeing when the offender and the victims may have crossed paths. So we'll get into that with the presentation. But as always, a little bit before we get into that, um, Nightbot is out there, so our mods just will work with it. And also, people in chat, respect the mods, respect each other, enjoy your chat. And with that being said, we'll get into it here. As always, a little brief bio. This is Mrs. Steve. I'm Steve. I'm retired law enforcement, had 20 years of service. Started off working in the jail, went on the road, and went into investigations. And during those 20 years, I had all different types of training from SWAT to becoming a state certified crime scene technician, which assisted me in my investigative career. I've investigated all different types of crimes from thefts up to homicides. And after I retired, became aware of the true crime world and decided to become an ambassador for law enforcement to the best I can. And it's been a great path, and I appreciate all my followers and subscribers and members because it allows me to go out and work the cold cases and assist some families. But now let's get into what we're going to be discussing tonight.
Chris is here. If you want to say.
Hey, Chris, with Mob Crews here tonight. I'm glad you're here. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward, especially with the Mob Crew, that Chris and I, as we go into the new year, we're going to be working closely together and going out and assisting some more families. He's got some things set up further west than what I am. So I'll be making some trips, and he'll also be making some trips. And we're going to be doing a lot of collaboration together in the coming year. And I absolutely respect Chris and what he's done and what he has done in the past, especially with Dylan Round's case. But anyway.
Thank you to all those well wishers for the Georgia Bulldogs. You know, I've got on my red and black. So yes. Thank you. Go Dogs.
Yes, I was very fortunate that everything went to plan last night.
But, and Chris didn't even hear me last night, did he?
No, not a thing.
See?
But if you have any information regarding the homicides of Madison, Kaylee, Ethan, or Xana, absolutely make sure you notify the proper authorities, get that information to them for that. It's still a long process and we want justice. And if you have information that is regarding possible information as far as the offender who's been charged in this case, make sure you get that information also to the proper authorities so they can move forward with that information. But tonight we're going to be talking about a lot about the cell phones location, CSLI, cell site location information. Some places refer to it as cell location site. So CSLI is how it's listed in the affidavit, and so we're going to be going with that. But as I was doing my research and looking at the time frame as the information came forward of what were the possibilities of Kohberger's possession of his phone that he acquired in June. And it plainly states in the affidavit of when he activated that phone and activated that account in June. And I thought that, well, what phone did he have prior to? What were the movements? Because he was finishing up school in the East and he was about to go out West and continue his education and finalize and move into the next level. And it became interesting to me that we don't currently know what travels he had. We don't know how many trips he made East and West. And law enforcement and the affidavit, as we'll see in a few minutes, they talk about at least 12 times that he visited. Are there other devices, other phones that law enforcement has within their files that they didn't include? And that was something that I found that it was strange that they only started with this phone on a certain date. Of course, it's when the account came to the being a part of the focus of the investigation. But so law enforcement would be looking at him and not only just for the Idaho homicides, but they'd be looking for his past travels and histories and possible link to other crimes in the East, Pennsylvania, or any area between his travels from Pennsylvania to Idaho. Did he have other phones that were prior activated to that date? And where are those phones? And what data do they contain? And what would those other phones and devices possibly could play in this investigation? And how many of those phones and what type of searches were made, not only of the residences and what they may have seized and that now are in the hands of law enforcement, but what about the data that may be in some type of cloud? And law enforcement will be looking at all that information. And the reason I was going and looking at this, like I said, I was trying to build a timeline of trying to look at what his movements were. We know pretty much what law enforcement has given us on 12 occasions, and they list out at least 12, but they only focus on a couple of dates. And so from those dates, there's a lot of times in between, and they don't note every time that he traveled between Pullman, Washington, and Utah. I mean, not Utah, but Idaho, the University of Idaho. And so we don't have that information. And so we have to, kind of speculate. They clearly announced that he's been there at least 12 times. We just don't know the dates. And so not knowing the dates, we don't know exactly when the victims crossed the paths with the offender, in this case, Kohberger. And that is going to be critical. Law enforcement, they know on this single phone for sure exactly when those paths were, what the parallels were, and probably from the financials of Kohberger and from the phone data, they would be able to isolate almost exactly when those paths started running parallel with each other. And as we've stated before, and I've even stated it on Chris's channel, that we look at the victimologies, and any of the victims, they may have not known anything about being stalked. They may not have known anything about their relationship with Kohberger, but he knew about them. And that when the offender knows and they're in that process of stalking and being a predator, and when you're dealing with psychopaths, sometimes if he is the one that's responsible for this, we always have to put that disclaimer in there, because right now he's only been charged with it. There's probable cause to effect his arrest and put him in this position. But that doesn't mean a jury hasn't found him guilty yet, so we have to presume he's innocent until then. Now, there is a mountain of evidence that here in the probable cause that seems at this point insurmountable for the defense to overcome. But as we've seen in other cases, defense teams often do overcome that evidence. But a little bit about the back as news and when the arrest was announced and everything, December 30th, Moscow police came out and described the incident that on November the 13th, 2022, at 11:58 hours, Moscow Police Department officers responded to a call at 1122 King Road for the report of an unconscious individual. Upon arrival, officers discovered 4 deceased individuals, which were later ruled to be homicide. And so they effected an arrest in Pennsylvania, which is the home residence of a 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger, and who was arrested in Albrightville, Pennsylvania, on a fugitive from justice arrest warrant. And so this is the information. This is a picture of him. If you have ever crossed paths with this individual, you know any information about him, make sure that you get that information into law enforcement, to the DA's office, or to the defense team, because we want a fair trial, and all the information has to be there to make sure that justice is served. All right. So now we'll get into a little bit about some of the information that's contained in the affidavit. There's a lot of information, and I don't want to read it word for word. I want to hit the highlights of things that pointed in a certain direction to me from a law enforcement perspective that I would be evaluating as I investigated this individual. You would note that, of course, he has a undergraduate degree in psychology and cloud-based forensics. And that while in Pullman, he had applied at the Pullman Police Department for an internship, and that he was talking about and that how that the collection and analyzing technological data for public safety operations. And what was the reason behind that? Now we can look back with hindsight and say that this individual, the Mob Crew, $10 super sticker. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your support. That's awesome. But that looking at in hindsight at his abilities and how many mistakes he made in technological data, and knowing that he had created papers on it, that he really didn't take it to heart, that if he is the offender and he knew how they would collect and analyze that information, how in the world could he mess up so bad with a cell phone and put himself in a position to be able to be tracked at least 12 times? And not only from his residence. Just curious, $9.99. Thank you for your service, Stephen, to both of you for all your hard work and being the voice for those that don't have one. Thank you. Just curious. That means a lot to us.
I love your name.
I do too. But he made so many mistakes that you wouldn't think someone that had a undergraduate degree in the level of education he had and wishing to assist a law enforcement agency in collecting and analyzing the very data that eventually came back and bit him. Absolutely ironic, I guess, is that would be that the one thing that you wrote about that you wanted to help in is the one thing that cost you or possibly will lead to your conviction. Prior to going, he may have already traveled out to Idaho, but at one point in between or during the process of finishing up in one school and transferring to another, he did a research participation. And in the affidavit, law enforcement made reference to it. Everyone can go out there and look at this research participation on that project. YT Grandma, $10.
I like your name too.
YT. You too. I guess that's you.
You too?
More than likely. Yeah, more than likely. Appreciate your support. That's awesome. Thank you. But he was doing that paperwork, and was he already pre-planning and trying to find out how that he would be able to possibly commit the perfect crime? It's going to be argued. It's going to be brought into the courts, and it will be extremely interesting. And once again, it's that data that once you go out there and you put something on this web, it's there forever. And as we've seen in this investigation and in many others. But back to the affidavit. On December 23rd, the investigator, he was granted a search warrant. And the highlight of this part of the affidavit is that it was granted so that they could trace this phone with the digits 8458 to aid in the efforts to determine if Kohberger stalked any of the victims or conducted surveillance on the King Road residence. Because once they had that, now they're going to go back and gather all that information. And from that historical data, they're going to be able to obtain a lot of different types of historical files. What exactly were his travels on days that he kept his phone active? How often did he get into a vehicle and turn his phone off anytime during those routes? and how often did he keep that phone on from the time that he went mobile until he came back home and recharged or turned the phone off. All that would be historical data that will be analyzed, and it has been analyzed. Then further on into the search warrant, and they talk about that the 8458 phone from AT&T, that the account was opened in June of 2022. I believe this is still why his residence primary was in Pennsylvania, but we still don't know exactly what his travels were in those months around June, because he did the research paper in May in a local college in Pennsylvania. And so now we're talking about June, and he's prepping and transferring over to the fall semester in Washington State. Got too many states I have to figure out here. But that they went out and got the historical records from when he opened that account, June 2022, all the way to the present day of the this search warrant and affidavit being filed. And you can see here at the bottom of the page at least 12 occasions prior to November the 13th, 2022, which is the date of the homicides. And at least, what does that mean? It kind of hints at they have far more data than they're releasing to us. Or they are suspecting that they will acquire more data. And because they know currently exactly how many times. At least is not something that is scientific, or but it is some ways that they will hint at times, law enforcement trying to show you that this is the minimum we have, or kind of make you think that's all they have, but that's not the case. They have far more, and at least means that I would expect that either there's more for this account, or there's another device that they have data showing him being in the area. And could that device be anything from a laptop to another cell phone? I personally carry at all time three phones.
Cracks me up.
I carry 3 phones. And on our account, we have a total of 6 phones. And so we are a multi-phone family.
Expensive phone.
We have more phones than we have cars. We have more phones than we have kids and grandkids. So, but and on further into the affidavit, you look at it, and that we see that that phone became a point of interest August the 21st. Now, this is August the 21st is a very interesting date. Because if you go in and look at the schedule for the fall semester, I think it started a lot of the paperwork and filing for the fall semester of 2022 was August the 22nd. So he's there prior to the registration, as you would expect. How much earlier, we don't know. But coming in from Pennsylvania, mob crew, yellow light train special. Thank Mr. and Mrs. Steve. A lot more evidence when discovery comes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yellow light. We don't. Your blue light's on.
Well, he said yellow, but I got a blue one. I have to go blue. I guess I'll have to change it to yellow.
Absolutely. But this phone indicates that even prior to all the final August 22nd that he was in town. And we'd have to look at that when we have 2 dates of great interest. We have the movement of August the 21st, when we are first advised that he's in Idaho, at the University of Idaho, and he gets stopped by this law enforcement officer just a short distance. I mean, looking at this map, you're only probably looking at just a couple of miles, 5 minutes or so as the crow flies. But when you look at from the traffic stop, August 21st at 11:37 p.m., which is late at night, and this is the day before that he would be registering August the 22nd, that even close to midnight, he's still out on the road riding around in the same town that just 3 months later, that a homicide occurs at 1122 King Road, a quadruple homicide, that his DNA is found at, and which is, just absolutely critical to the investigation, that DNA. But here, as I explain about that traffic stop, one of these occasions, of at least 12 occasions, that the phone utilized cellular resources that provide coverage to the King Road residents from 1034 to 1135. And that they're verifying, and it's important because they say that the pings verify that the phone is consistent with the location of the traffic stop. So it's supporting evidence that the cell tower systems are operating, they're consistent, placing them in a location within the limits, and it's supporting of the traffic stop. Susan Purdy, $5 super sticker. Thank you. Appreciate your support. Means a lot to us.
Thank you, Susan.
And then we have the father, Kaylee here, Steve, that talks about that in a recent interview, he indicates that devices are close enough that it touched the Wi-Fi at 1122, which is huge because, as you can imagine, and as you can test yourself, you can take any of your devices, walk outside your residence, and what point does your Wi-Fi kick out? And also what point does it link back up? And so it's touching their Wi-Fi. Doesn't say how strong of a signal it is, but it's recognizable and it touches their Wi-Fi. Now, this information wasn't contained in the affidavit. This is information that he is relaying. Is it absolutely correct? I don't know. He believes it's correct. So when we look back at all the information, that once again, that the DNA, the cameras, the phone, and the vehicle play a part in the his movements. We don't know exactly of those other dates, and probably 8 or 9 times that his phone was in the area. We know that he left his residence at a certain time, traveling to the towards the locations where the homicides occurred. We know that after the homicides occur, he reactivates his cell phones. And then there's a great trip that Chris did a great job last night covering about that massive loop that he did that night and moving around, and also the following day. And so there's a lot of information, and that phone will play a huge part. But we have to remember what other devices will play a huge part in this. There is a possibility that he may have had another phone or another device that linked up, and law enforcement will follow up on that. And this will all, like I said, it would be even the part of the night that he chose, if he is the offender, to commit these homicides. He turned his phones off while en route. And what triggered that, we'll be getting into in other videos. And why did he pick that one night, and before the fact that he's going to have to explain, and the defense team, that if he normally does not turn that phone off. And we have a lot of records that show that, they indicate that at least 12 times he traveled from his residence to that location of 1122 and never turned his phone off, that we know of in those 2 locations. But the night of the homicides, the one occasion that is noted that he is absent from that, but there is supporting evidence that he was in the area, but on that one occasion, his phone was off. And the supporting evidence that he's there, of course, is the DNA that's on that knife sheath. They have no digital evidence that he was there. They do have evidence of him being on cameras, and they do have evidence supporting that it's a white vehicle matching the description of what he drives. So they got DNA cameras. They just don't have the phone data. So they have 3 of the 4. Once again, and that's strong evidence, and it's going to be hard for the defense team to be able to explain this mountain of evidence. All right.
Sorry, LGW, my dog's wiped out the back eyes. So I would say I am sorry because that is sad, but I'm glad we won.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Anyway. But now in closing, if you do have any information about the homicides of Madison, Kaylee, or Ethan, or Zana, absolutely get that information to the proper authorities, because like I said, for justice to be found, all the information has to be there. And if you have information that exonerates the Kohberger at this point, absolutely get that information out there, because we want the person responsible for these homicides to be held accountable, regardless of who that is.
All right, let's see here. Hold on one second. They keep coming in. Bear with me one second. Let's see here. Rachel Rose is a new sub, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, there's Cincy. All right, so let's start here. 827. Cincy. All right, let's see here. Verbal Judo is going to start us off tonight. My first question, well, she's got at Mrs. Steve, but this is for you.
Uh-huh.
Can my iPhone be tracked when I turn off my location?
They make no mention. They say that he deactivated his phone. Are there other processes out there that can? I'm unfamiliar with. I believe Snowden, who the big issues with him, when he first came in, that there is certain phones and certain tracking abilities of phones. I don't know at what level of intelligence that takes and what agencies could have that abilities. But from the information that's released in the affidavit, they don't lay claim that they have or were. They say that they could only, information they released is only what during certain times prior to deactivation and after it was reactivated. Is it possible? Possible. I don't know. I know there's a lot of people out there thinks and that it does occur, and it may very well. I just don't.
Now, didn't somebody say that they can track the IMEI number without the location on one of these chats?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's,
maybe.
Yeah, there's, like I said, when you get to that level of intelligence and stuff, we know so little about what certain agencies can do and how much of that information they can share for national security. We have no idea.
Yeah, well,
it wouldn't surprise me. T. Steve, I'm curious about the part of the probable cause affidavit where it says his phone pings, but they don't believe he was there. Any idea why this is included? That was interesting. Was he trying to create a diversion, or and for what purposes? And they'll be analyzed. And I did see some mentioning of that, and that was curious.
All right. So let's see here. 828.
Because there was a lot of thought, or he thought he was creating and doing a lot of things that would not lead to him being identified. But we know in hindsight that he was identified rather quickly, in my opinion. Tom in, $5. Hello, all you true crime webbers. Thank you for your hard work, Mr. and Mrs. Steve. We truly appreciate your expert insight into these cases. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your support. And we try to do as much as we can to bring as much insight to it as we possible.
All right. So let's see here. I don't know what that is.
Mrs. Steve is looking at him.
All right, here we go. I'm trying to catch up.
Okay.
Let's see here. Okay. Perfect.
Everybody needs a Mrs. Steve. I've told Chris that several times.
All right. And Dave, Steve, do you think it's possible BK was wearing a shoulder harness for knife?
I hadn't thought about that, and if so, could it have broken? That is an interesting possibility. I hadn't really thought about. Um, I always just accredited it that maybe he was carrying it, Crocodile Dundee, just sticking it inside his waistband. But that is possible.
Crocodile Dundee?
Yeah, because he was just sticking it into his waistband in a sheath.
Really? All right. And history underfoot. Could he have first noticed the victims on their social media posts and then figured out where they lived and worked?
Absolutely. And that was part of the reason I was trying to go back. And that's when I realized exactly when that account was open on this phone. Because I was found it interesting that they had a set date in June that the search warrant was dated. And when I read it, I realized, oh, he had just opened that account. And so I thought, well, where is the phone that he had prior to this account? And is it a number he just transferred over? And but yes, I was going down that path, trying to figure out why they started with that date. And they may have other devices prior to that date and his movements, and where that will lead, we currently don't know. Because I can tell you that when the victims became targets, and everything indicates that they were targeted by him, at least one or two of them were targeted by him and was under some type of surveillance because living 10 miles away and in that neighborhood of where they lived, there's nothing there that would bring him there unless he had something he was focusing on in that neighborhood. And they're on a secondary street. They're not on the primary street. That when you turn up that driveway of where 1122 King Road is, it's not a main road. It's not a main cut through. So he has to have a reason to be going there. And when and why he started targeting them could be, as the previous question, of when did he become aware of them on the social media? Was it while he was in Pennsylvania and he was doing research that he was going to be moving to Washington, and then he was checking out both universities, and did he spot one of the social media platforms and interactions that Madison or Kaylee or Zana or even Ethan, which I think Ethan was absolutely surprised to him that night. The others not.
Okay. And Rose, do they have GPS or only pings? And what distance would those pings cover?
There's a lot of interest in pings. I did a test a couple months ago on another homicide investigation, and those pings would be from very close to a mile to across, or several miles. I don't know exactly how big the area, but they indicate that it's consistent with the traffic stop, that they're able to locate him with relative information that it is correct and it will ping accurately. And also, when you count in the Wi-Fi information, bring that data on board, that it is even more so, because Wi-Fi is a very limited range. And so if he pings on that Wi-Fi, then they absolutely know that, or not ping, but it recognizes his device. Then we know he was extremely close in proximity.
And Lisa Woody, does his car have a satellite tracker?
I looked up on the on those vehicles. And there's something about some of their radio systems that they have that can be tracked. Once you know a certain numerical identifier of that radio that's within that vehicle. Have they checked that? I don't know. Because I did some research on what was the standard packages of trackers or GPS, and there is some type of a radio system that's in those models that has the abilities to be tracked once you know certain information about that vehicle. And if that is the case, law enforcement will look that up. I-43 Pammy, $5. Appreciate you. Would you think that BK wearing something along the line of a Tyvek? The witness indicates dark clothing. And I have a lot of Tyvek myself, but it's not dark, but it's all white. That doesn't mean that he wasn't wearing some type of dark clothing, rain suit, or I mean, there's a lot of different types of clothing he could have. Is that what he left the residence wearing? Did he go somewhere and change prior to continuing on when he turned the phone off and continue to the location? And then after the crime was committed, did he then drive to another location and change back to a different type of clothing? Don't know. I have seen criminals do that, but don't know if this is part of his process.
Let's go ahead and answer this one. What is Tyvek? Would you like for me to get that?
No, I get it. I don't know. I guess you'll have to get it.
Is it bloody though?
Yeah, that's got blood stains on it. Synthetic blood stains.
You sure you want it?
Yeah.
You want it?
Yeah. Mrs. Steve, we're all locked in
I'm
there.
covered up and everything.
This is, you can't really tell, but it's almost like a paper plastic combination. And this has synthetic blood on it. So, but that I do some processing with. But it's almost like I said, it's like a paper plastic coated material coveralls that you can place, and it painters use them, mechanics can use them, and we use them at crime scenes as far as CSI. So if you ever watch any of the CSI shows and you see these guys that look like they're in space suits, the white, that's the Tyvek.
Okay. All right. So now let me catch up. Okay, show and tell. They like that. They like your Tyvek.
Yeah, I've got some videos on me wearing Tyvek, and I've got some more Tyvek up. I got several tests that's coming out that I'm in the process of creating for this of what happened about the recovery of the footprint and stuff. So we'll have that in the coming days. Some of this, how they possibly recovered that footprint. Elena Online, $5 super sticker. Thank you for your support.
Thank you so much. All right, let's see here.
That is awesome.
All right.
That's going to help me so much in the coming. I may be moving out or traveling up into the Midwest.
Moving
Yeah.
to the Midwest?
No, I'm not going to move. I've got a trip
You'd be
planned.
lonely.
I got a trip planned.
You would be without your Mrs. Steve.
Yep.
All right, Jeff. Were any of the victims vegan? Curious if that may be related to an MO.
I think there's reference made that one of them or a couple of the victims worked at a vegan restaurant that's located in the local area. And that may be where the paths crossed, and that's possible. We just don't know yet.
And Molly, glad you're feeling better, Molly. I'm wondering if Pullman PD does mental health testing for LE applicants, and if they do it for interns.
That's a good question. back when I first started, they didn't require mental health testing. Um, the smaller agencies didn't. Larger agencies, of course, always or did. Um, but that is an interesting question if they would for the internships.
Okay. And Ashley B, he wanted people to know it was him so they could talk about him and do studies on him.
If that's the case, he's going to get it. You're exactly right. If that's the case, most of them, if you're looking at a psychopath that has narcissistic traits, they absolutely think that they're untouchable. And they don't want to be caught. But when they are caught, of course, we learn so much about them, and they're placed under a microscope, and he will be. Dark Arts by $20. Hey guys, Steve, in your opinion, what other evidence would you be most interested in, assuming it could be collected, in order to get a solid conviction? If this case goes to court, or if he please, thank you. I'm interested in what was found in the victim's hands and fingernails, for the fact that during violent confrontations, fingernails or doesn't matter if it's male or female, they're often broken. And that's due to that when they grab and they are fighting in those survival situations, the human body, it claws and also it grabs. And especially with females, females are far more known that the first thing they'll grab, and I've seen this, now I don't know what all the stats on it is, but for whatever reason, females, and it's very productive, will grab hair. And if they did that with him, and he has enough hair that they may have some hair DNA there also, that may have been that they were able to grab and pull. And if they do have that type of DNA that can be obtained from hair, then of course there'll be more supporting evidence of his presence. But the fingernail scrapings and the fingernail clippings and the hair is what I expect that they will find inside that residence or from the victims.
And Molly, would be interesting to know if he changed his phone number as well as his cell provider in June of 2022. And I think I said that same
You
thing.
did. And it will be.
Good call, Molly.
It says he opened the account. It didn't say that he transferred. And so I don't know if it's a brand new account and he has two phones. Like I say, I got three. And so between those three phones, you can find me anytime. But that will be interesting if he did away with one number and obtained a new number, if he kept two numbers.
You may never get through. All right. And Pigeon Mac. Mr. and Mrs. Steve, y'all look dog gorgeous tonight. Look at there.
Yeah, we're matching.
And do you think all cold cases are solvable, like with enough personnel or resources or whatever? That's a good question.
We're looking at so many cold cases that are being solved due to DNA and what they're doing now with the genetics. And so if evidence was collected properly and stored properly, all of the ones that DNA, because all these crime scenes, the DNA is there. It's just a matter of finding it. And it's so often that at some point it's there. That doesn't mean that at some time or during the discovery that the DNA profile was destroyed. But at some point, the DNA was there. And if law enforcement is fortunate enough to be there within the right time frame and able to collect it and then store it correctly, those cases will more than likely be solved. And that's all that we can hope for.
I love this. Thank you, Dark Arts. It was fabulous last night.
Oh yes, I've heard about it a couple of times today.
Only a couple. I hadn't been home all day. So there you go. All right. Let's see here. Maybe once he searched Instagram. I got to do this one. Can I get one of those phones?
You have no idea. If only I had a hammer. And
Maybe I should send Chris a phone. You think?
whenever I talk to Chris at times, his phone absolutely. He has some choice words in the description of his phone. It tickles me at times. So
that is hysterical.
from my private conversations, there's more behind the scenes on that. He needs a hammer.
That is hysterical. All right. And we've done this one. And
Your blue light's on.
Oh my gosh. I like my life. I'm MCM. It seems concerning to me that his phone number has new.
Mm-hmm.
Is it likely he got a new number because he has other victims? I think I said that same thing.
Well, the now that he is known, his DNA profile will be out there. They will go back and find his financial history and footprint. They'll go out and find his digital cell phone history and footprint, and they will track him across everywhere he's been. Now that he's from the time that he could have been an offender to present day. And so there's a lot of research that's going to be going on about this individual. And it wouldn't surprise me if certain crimes may come to light.
And Lisa, can they look at his complete phone history to see if he ever cut his phone off for a few hours?
We know on 2 consecutive days they did, or the same day, because in the early morning hours, whenever he was reportedly, if he's the offender, was at the scene, his phone was off. And then later that day, as he traveled 100 and something miles from residence, once again, that phone was turned off. Law enforcement doesn't mention other times the phone was turned off. They only indicate that they were able to track him the other times from his residence, and that their phone was trackable near the 1122 address.
And thanks, Jeff. We need some thumbs up, guys, for Mr. Steve.
Thank y'all. We appreciate your support.
All right. And let's go see here. IMS 93. Steve, have you seen the reporting on the Reddit user that went by the name Papa Rogers, who mentioned the sheath before it was released to public? That might have been Brian discussing case online.
Yes, I've seen that, and it is interesting. Is it possible you had someone that just wildly guessed that? Yes, I think there was even a reference that someone on Sleuth guessed that he would be from the University of Washington, or Washington State University, for the fact of the FBI's involvement. You know, if you have 1,000 guesses out there, someone's going to be right sometimes. But there's a lot of information when you look at his and the arguments, and but law enforcement will look at all that information, and if they determine that he is one and the same as Papa Rogers, then that will come out in court, and yet again, that will be hard evidence. And right now, we just don't know. But that is being researched, I have no doubt. Speculating, but I have no doubt.
Okay, I'm gaggy.
She had a long night yelling about bulldogs, not from anticipation or nervousness, just from all the scoring they did.
It's going away.
You need me to read?
All right. Missed colleges really like to use cloud computing, so I
Just pull it up.
wonder.
I'll do it until you get your voice back.
It's starred. Right there. Okay, I'll do it. There you go. Read it.
Colleges really like to use cloud computing, so I wonder if he noted that in his brilliance. Well, like I said, it's going to be so ironic that the very thing that he specialized in and wanted to excel in is leading to his demise.
Okay. Let's try this. All right, Cincy.
I do it.
You're going to do it?
Yeah. Question at True Crime Web. Do you think he could have escalated potentially to a mass event at university had he not been caught? Certain individuals have whatever their fantasy driven crime will be, that is their wheelhouse. Anything is possible, but he was targeting these victims for a reason. Now, I do expect that he was only targeting one or two, because there were at least two of the victims that were not supposed to be there that night. And we're going to get into that in the next show because he was on a mission, and everything that told him not to, that is higher risk, he ignored and continued. And he did, like I say, choose the weapon of choice that he wanted in this knife, and what part of his fantasy world that drove him to do that. We just don't know.
Josh, that's so sweet.
Sorry, Steve. Josh DePosh, $5. Thank you for your support. That's awesome, though. Sorry, Steve. Mom called. Missed most of your presentation as much as I liked you. Would miss a call from her. Laughing out. We'll rewatch later. Sure, it's good. Thank you, sir. And absolutely, every one of you, speak to your mom as much as possible. Absolutely.
All right. And since he's gone, and Molly. And this was the iPhone. iPhone still pings if power is turned off for safety. You can go in and stop that. Otherwise, has to be in airplane mode, as far as I know.
Yeah, they said he deactivated it, and I know about as much about smartphones as I do Google machines. So, I'm just not from that generation that truly understands everything. Every time she goes out and gets me a new phone, I stare at it in amazement.
All right. And Mist, can you do
Patreon? I had a disagreement with PayPal. I don't know. No,
we'll have to follow up on that.
We'll have to check on that. Thank you, though.
I have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
All right. IMS 93. Do you think Brian brought multiple knives?
It's possible, but we know he had at least one because, and he had one sheath that we know of. If there's other injuries that don't match the injuries that match the sheath, in law enforcement from the medical examination, they'll know what type of a weapon was used in these homicides, and they'll be able to track it because they said that sheath, they included it in the search warrant and our affidavit. And so a lot of the injuries more than likely match the type of knife that would have been able to fit within that sheath.
Molly's going to help us with Patreon.
Okay, thank you. We're new to this, and as we figure out all this stuff, we'll find out the best ways.
All right. And Miss Kaylee was in the house when he started this, right?
Yes, as far as we know, all of them arrived home within that small window. And, and then from the affidavit, it's a very limited time from the sighting, the last sighting of the vehicle, and when the vehicle left. It's a very small time frame. You're only looking at less than 20 minutes. Absolutely amazing of that narrow window of how much violence could occur and how he was able to complete these 4 homicides.
And CN Red Flag 1 month member.
Thank
you
you.
so much. We greatly appreciate it. All right, let's see here. And Miss, why would he start with a knife and not a silencer? Ick, awful thought.
Well, some people know nothing about firearms. And, is it just something that is part of his fantasy driven of what he wants to commit and how he wants to commit a crime? When you're dealing with this type of individual that wants to commit a crime and it's part of their fantasy world, they're going to follow that fantasy world. And if it includes that we want to use a knife and it has to be a knife, then it will be a knife. They won't change it. It's what they are committed to using and what that desire tells them that will satisfy their hunger to complete their fantasy. And obviously, if he chose a knife and he was able to commit these 4 homicides, that is his weapon of choice.
And the mob crew, if he had AT&T, I can tell you they're probably tracking him a lot better than if he had T-Mobile. Sorry, T-Mobile is bad out here.
AT&T is what that
That's
is.
what I said,
Okay.
AT&T.
Okay. Yes. I don't know. We have AT&T, don't we?
We do have AT&T.
We have the AT&T here.
That just means he's going to want a phone from you.
Yes. When I get out there, I'll tell you how good AT&T is out there.
There you go. All right, Molly. They make full body Kevlar bodysuits now, right? That cannot be comfortable.
Now, there's different types of body armor. Some of the body armor that I wore most of my career was ballistic value. There's a different.
Where is it?
It's one of them's right there. One of my old ones.
See?
Yeah, right up under the
head.
The head is one of my, and that type of body armor is not resistant to, although it would slow a knife down, it still is not edged weapon resistant. Now they do make certain body armor that is. Since they wackadoodle 3 pounds super stickers. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
That's awesome. But yes, some body armor can be used against sharp-edged weapons, and some body armor is only for ballistic values from firearms. A lot of the prison staff and jail staff, they'll wear the type of armor that is against edge weapons, shanks, things that inmates build inside of prisons. Out on the streets where the officers face more firepower, they wear the ballistics of facing firearms.
All right, the Rockaways. Did BK make any attempt at establishing an alibi aside from turning off the phone?
Not that we know of or was mentioned in the affidavit.
And I love this name, Tater Tot. Makes me hungry. The one shoe print throws me. Out of that party house, they call it, just one shoe?
Yes, we don't know exactly where he was at in the house and what type of flooring was from point A to point B. And exactly because when you look at transfer stains from one surface that is blood stained, soaked, that as you walk, sometimes you can have so much that it doesn't leave a clear latent. But at somewhere, as he travels that path, there's going to be a certain location where all the conditions are correct. You have the right amount of blood stain that will leave the best and identifiable latent print. And where is that? And does the surface that's leaving that transfer stain on it, is it something that is receptive to that? I mean, if it's carpet and things, sometimes it won't. or if you're walking across rugs, sometimes they will, sometimes it won't. But everything has to be perfect. And when he stepped in that location, was that the perfect conditions to be able to leave a clear latent print. I'm going to be doing some testing on that. I've got to lay the floor. I've got my synthetic blood. I've got my shoes ordered, and we'll be doing those tests. Karen Boardman became a YouTube member. Thank you for your support.
Thank you so much. Glad to have you aboard. And Aaron Bremer, Tyvek would be noisy when it rubs together when you move it, wouldn't it?
Probably
Yes.
so, but I don't know if he went to that extreme or not. I would think it's unlikely with the Tyvek because it is typical. You order it and it's white. I don't even know if they make a black one, although they do have some light type of materials, such as some of the rain suits that would probably work pretty well also.
And Happy Wife, is Brian able to access the internet in jail?
Certain parts of the jail, they allow that, especially for the court part of it. And with his, because he is innocent until proven guilty. And if he's going to be looking up certain information for his defense, and the only way he can get it is through the law library that he may have access to for limited times under certain security measures, it wouldn't surprise me that he would have full access to a lot of or some of the internet.
In True Crime with Sunshine, Mr. Steve, you may have already said, but in your opinion, do you think the suspect was inserting himself into social media or attention seeker?
It's very possible. And certain personalities do, because they want that attention. BTK, that's what was one of the downfalls of him, is that he wasn't getting enough attention. And certain individuals, if they're, that type of offender, that yes, their profile and their fantasy will drive them down a road that ultimately will lead them to making those mistakes.
And the Rockaways, Kohberger turned to veganism to replace drugs and control other obsessions in his life. Anyone agree? I told you I yelled last night. I'm sorry. Apologize for the voice problems. Can you read that?
Yes. And that could be. I don't know if that is something that would replace drugs, just becoming a vegan or not. I have no idea.
That'd be a gagger. And Michelle, is it true his sister is a psychologist of some sort?
I had seen where that there was some type of, and it wouldn't shock me or surprise me if his family is involved in of higher education. That wouldn't surprise me. But I think I had heard some reports of that. I don't know if it's true or not. Dark Arts. $5. Is it possible law enforcement has found other perp DNA on the victims and just didn't include it in the affidavit? Also, thank you so much for having Dr. Susan on. Absolutely. Dr. Susan was absolutely unbelievable. And her insight. And we most certainly appreciate her coming on with us. Regardless if law enforcement has found it, we don't know of anyone else that they are driving towards. They say they have their offender. And so I look at, and we only have from the one witness that says that they had face-to-face confrontation or saw them. We have where one offender was seen inside the residence at a critical time. And so I would expect that they may find other DNA profiles, especially when the defensive team gets into that residence. Is there other profiles of DNA somewhere in that residence. Absolutely. You know, you've got all the DNA from everyone ever entered that house in certain areas. You may be able to find an unknown DNA profile, but does that mean they're the offender? Now, the defense is going to bring up, and if they can get it into court, they'll try to bring up that third person alternative suspect theory. But will that be successful? We just don't know.
And Nancy, Steve, why did they wait to take the mattresses out so late? I was wondering that from the start. Why would they hire a cleanup crew without pulling out mattresses and furniture first?
We have to look at it and realize what they did take from the residents. Those mattresses, if you look at your own, go into your bedroom, you have different layers of blankets, sheets, fitted sheets, mattress protectors. They collected those. And so by the time you get to the mattress itself, you're looking at something that could have been 3 layers down from other areas that would have the most recent DNA. And that's what you want. You have to be so careful when you're processing crime scenes that you get the DNA that is recent and related to the crime itself. And that's going to be in those first layers of bedding, the top sheets, the top blankets, the pillowcases, the pillows, the fitted sheets, the mattress protectors. And by the time you get to the mattress itself, and so I don't have a problem with them not taking the mattresses themselves. They had all the other layers that will have the best and latest DNA that would be related to the crime scene.
And just curious, Steve, do you think they'll need the weapon to get him charged for this horrible crime, or will DNA suffice?
No, they won't. I'm sure they're looking for it, and I'm sure they want it. But no, I don't think that they need it. And they, like I said, they've already charged him, but the conviction is a long way off.
And the Rockaways. Maybe once he knew he would attend school in Washington, he searched Instagram for students in the area, and that's how he encountered the girls before he even moved there.
And that's one of the reasons I was doing my research, because I was trying to figure out on his devices of what those dates were, and is that possible, and when he moved there, and how long was he there prior to being stopped. We just don't have that data currently.
And Perry, UK True Crime, why do you think it appears that he was so confident he could gain entry to the property that night without the alarm being raised?
And that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at, I think Thursday night, is that exact thing, is that he turned his phone off while en route, which was different than the other 11 times that law enforcement mentions about that they knew that he was in the area. And why was that? And why was he taking that and doing that? And when he gets there, we have vehicles that may have not been there on prior days and nights. And is that part of his travels in the neighborhood? Because they talk about the vehicle sighting traveling through the neighborhood 2 or 3 times. Was he checking for other information, and was he building up towards and justifying that it still was within his power to complete his mission? And all that stuff is going to be looked at. And had he been there on prior dates? Had he been in the residence prior? And they will be trying to look at that information. And we'll be looking at the Wi-Fi strength, and will they be able to tell how close proximity? Because I don't know what the values that some of the technologies have, that can they give exact proximities. and they will be looking at that from cell phone to the Wi-Fi.
All right, and CN red flags. Why would the search warrant for his apartment be sealed? It stated it could be dangerous to the public. Well, why would it be dangerous?
I don't know, and at some point it will be unsealed. We just don't know. But yes, I just don't know why they would state that.
And Perry, UK True Crime, do you think reference to finding a Vans brand shoe print and affidavit could be because they know Kohberger has or had this type of shoe?
I expect so, that they have identified that and it does match, and they were just kind of hinting at. Now, that is a very common shoe. I was looking for trying to find where I could go and obtain that shoe. And I called Baby Steve, and Baby Steve has one of those shoes with a diamond pattern. So we'll be using that in our testing next week.
All right. And Matthew at Steve, will the house be raised?
I don't know. I doubt it. That will be totally left up to the owners. Sometimes they do, especially with schools and things, but I don't know in this case. That'd be left up to what
Who would want to rent that?
I know.
All right, and verbal judo. It probably was not a drug party house, but it's still known as that. BK possibly was in that area seeking drugs.
I highly doubt about that. I mean, there's going to be rumors out there, and regardless of what went on at that house that night, for whatever reason, or what happened to these victims, it doesn't matter what they were doing anytime during their life.
Okay, and SB 74, what do you make of him going into a house he knows is full from observation and several parked cars?
I will be going in depth in that on Thursday night before the fact that.
Oh, you beat him to the punch, SB 74.
Because that is very interesting. Like I said, he was mission driven, and what was the triggers for that?
Yep. All right, let's see here. And Josh the Posh, what's the likelihood he was using social media as real-time stalking tool when his cell was pinged in the area prior to the homicide?
And that's where it also gets ironic that if he was using that social media to check on certain people, it also allowed law enforcement to identify him and trail him, stalk him, and bring him to justice. It's absolutely amazing.
All right, you got two more.
Okay.
And just curious, Steve, do you get the impression Brian's father knew about the crime before meeting Brian in Washington to make the trip back to Pennsylvania together?
I don't know. The family, we just don't know what text messages, phone calls, how often he called, and when did he call. Now, law enforcement will be looking at his phone data, and they'll be looking not only at his phone data, but they'll be looking at the residence and the phone data of his family. Did any of the family receive a phone call at 4:30 in the morning on November 13th? They'll be looking at that. And that's a good question, good observation. But law enforcement will be looking at that of what was the normal communications between him and his family. Did that change? Because he does have a historical, maybe even hysterical reaction. But he'll have a historical of how he normally contact record of his communications with his family, and did that change?
Flourishing spirits, could this be a hate crime, and in his mind he is the hero?
No, I don't even know how I could even No,
Couldn't
you
go
know,
there.
yeah, these are individuals of his same race, and I don't know, but no, I don't have any basis for that.
Okay, you still have two.
Okay.
All right. And Lisa, why did they never take the wreath from the door? Couldn't it have suspect's DNA?
I don't know. We do have the DNA from a single source at the crime scene, and did they identify that at a certain point? But did they know where the wreath was from and what contact would he have had on it? I would, certain people go to a crime scene and they collect everything in sight, and you have to evaluate and what part did it play in the crime? Something outside of the crime scene in the elements that is shielded from the second and third floor where the crime occurred. I can see why they didn't take the wreaths and other things.
All right. And last question, Dark Arts at TCW. If BK's DNA was on the victims, would they intentionally leave it out of the affidavit?
Very possible, and I expect that the DNA is there. They may or may not have found it at the time of this affidavit, but I expect that by the time court gets here, they will find it. Absolutely. I do believe that.
All right, you are done.
Well, guys, I appreciate everyone coming in tonight. I hope that if you have any information, like I said, notify law enforcement of that information, the prosecution, defense, and otherwise, so that we can get justice for these 4 victims and make sure that justice is found. But tomorrow night, I have that's Wednesday tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tomorrow I will be doing the commanders and detectives members conference that we do for our membership, and then we'll have another show after midnight at 12:05 tomorrow night a.m.
Without me,
without Mrs. Steve of the new Morning Watch show.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look forward to seeing y'all tomorrow night, both our members and for that. And so I'll see y'all then. Y'all stay safe, and thank y'all for being here. Appreciate everyone that donated and all our supporters, our viewers, our subscribers. And it means so much.
Thank you, mods.
Thank you. Y'all have a great night.
Love y'all.